All right, students, welcome. Chapter 5, Study Strategies. And that's what this big section is. Reading to learn from college textbooks. And I love the background that I have with all of the different notes highlighted. So to start off this chapter, this is something, and I have mentioned this before at the beginning of every one of our chapters. You have this pre-reading activity, and this is a good one that I want you to experience. And it says this chapter offers strategies for learning from college textbooks. What are some of the challenges you are facing in reading and understanding your textbooks this term? So write down for yourself, one challenge, two, and they give you three different examples. So write those down, and also you could use this within the discussion if you like. Uh, but this is a challenge, and even if you don't use this in your discussion, I thoroughly encourage you to do this exercise. So here's a discussion question. List different ways to improve reading and learning. How might you improve your reading and learning if you were doing it online, which is what you're doing now? So how what different strategies do you use to improve your reading and learning? And do you know any electronic tools that can help reading and learning? Some that you might be using right now. So next, as we move to this chapter, a plan for active reading. I used to show a video to some of my students about active reading, and one of the biggest things about I use this analogy, and you think about it. If you think about the books that you really like, and when you start reading them, it's almost as if you can visualize in your mind as you're reading. You can see that scene, you can you can make yourself be that person who's the main character, and it's almost as if you bring it to life. The same way, in many cases, I think they talk about this in the book, the same way that you would explain a movie to one of your friends that you saw that you really like. And that's the way that's the way that you want to become active in reading. So you got to participate in reading. And you have to use various strategies to stay focused. And here's the four steps in our book that they talk about. Previewing. Previewing. Step 2, marking. Step 3, reading with concentration. And step 4, reviewing. Very important steps for active reading. So previewing. You have scanning before you read. Looking at the amount of information, and within one setting you might decide you want to, you're going to read a chapter. If you say, okay, I've got this chapter, you scan it before you even start reading. Determine why this material was written. What's the purpose of this material? Read the title. Ask what you already know about this, the pre-existing knowledge. Read through the learning objectives. And usually every book has learning objectives at the beginning or at the end of a chapter. Read the end. What did I just say? Read the end of the chapter summary. And skim for headings and key terms, study exercises, tables, and figures. And it's important in our textbook, you have things that are highlighted that give you the headings, and then you have things that might be smaller that are highlighted that give you some key terms. You have different study exercises in our book throughout. See, that's the thing. You don't want to skip those things. You want to participate in. And tables and figures that might happen to give you information. Mapping. It's interesting. Now, this is a technique they talk about mapping, developing. It's interesting because I know most students say, oh, I don't use mapping, but a lot of times we all use mapping. If you're doing the different illustrations. Uh, if you notice, I kind of do a mapping when I do these presentations. I'll have a topic, then I have things that spring off from that topic. That's the way that you can utilize mapping uh, to get information and to develop ways to do it. And they give some details about mapping in our text. So outlining or listing, this is another way that you can work with your book. I love this different stickies: when, who, what, where, why, how, then the middle, the question. And so outline or listing is especially helpful for the read-write learners. And again, in outlines, and the same thing with mapping, feature the major concepts. What did I say earlier? Use the textbook headings as guides. Don't use full sentences in this when you're outlining or listing. Listing is effective for textbooks with many terms and definitions. You will be faced with many of those different things, and even now with many of your books. Chunking, they talk about this, putting related terms together in a group. A very good technique. So next, creating flashcards. Most students in my classes, a lot of people talk about how they use their flashcards, which are great information. And as they talk about this in the book, portable test questions. You can put the question or term on the front, write the answer or definition on the back. Good for kinesthetic and visual learners. Many different phone apps. I forget the one that one of my students last semester was talking about to create flashcards. But many of you might know about some of these different apps, and maybe you can listen in the discussion about it. So strategies for reading and marking. Marking helps focus and concentration when you mark it, and you highlight or underline the important passages. Make annotations or margin notes. Annotations, remarks about the content. Here's a little visual that shows some marking. I know one thing we've talked about this, had discussions in class about marking. You have to watch yourself with marking because sometimes it can slow you down from reading. Sometimes you end up marking too much of the book, and so you don't always get the important terms. Read before you mark. Think before you mark something. That's the most important thing. A lot of times we read something, we just read a sentence, we say, oh, no, you want to read it before you mark, and you want to think before you mark. And this is another technique. Take notes along with marking. Put some notes on the side. Do more than highlight and underline. Now, here's a great little video that I found, the College Info Geek, about 5 active reading strategies for textbook assignments.
Hey, what's up? It's Thomas Frank, and in this video, we're talking about active reading. So active reading is a method of reading a book with the intent of pulling something useful out of it. And it's different from just passively going over the text once just to experience it. So right off the bat, I'm going to say there are a lot of systems that have been put forward, like SQ3R, SQ4R, and lots of other acronym-driven systems for active reading. And I think that these systems are too cumbersome, they take too long, and I'm not going to be going over them in this video. And I'm not the only one who thinks this. So instead, what I'm going to do is show you how I'm applying active reading to 3 specific books that I've been reading recently and how I'm able to recall the information better by doing that. But first, I'm going to give you 5 general active reading tips that you can apply to any reading that you have to do. So the first tip is to use a technique called pseudo-skimming. And the longer the readings that you have to do are, the more likely a lot of the paragraphs in those readings are going to be filler. That could be like background, it could be extra detail, it could be asides, things like that. And often you don't really need to read these paragraphs all that in depth to get the information you need for your classes. So the pseudo-skimming technique is really a paragraph by paragraph technique where you skim each paragraph very quickly, and then you sort of get a feel for the reading and figure out which paragraphs hold the most important information. The second tip is to try to read backwards. A lot of textbooks are not all that exciting. They don't really have a narrative, and you're not going to spoil yourself if you read it backwards or go to the end. So if you want to figure out what a certain chapter is all about, you can first go to the back, look at the summary, look at the vocab lists that are put back there, some of the questions, the review items, and get a feel for what the actual chapter wants you to learn in a big sense, and like a sky-high sense. And once you get that, you can start going backwards and seeing like, okay, yes, this vocabulary word was mentioned here, this graphic mentions a topic that was in a review question, etc., etc. Tip number 3 is to come up with questions while you read. So when you are going through the chapter, if you're doing pseudo-skimming or anything else, When something comes up that you don't really know about, then note that down as a question. And you can also use the headings, the subheadings in the chapter as questions. So if there's a subheading that talks about a specific concept, you can reword that as a question, maybe even write it down in your notes, and then as you go through the actual content of that section, answer the question for yourself. And you can do this in review as well. Tip number 4 is to pay attention to the formatting of a text. Now, when I was in college, I would do this with almost all of my readings. I would open up the book, I would look at almost every single bolded item or list of things, and I would pay special attention to those items in the text because they probably were to go over processes that are important to the chapter or go over vocab terms that are almost certainly going to appear on tests. So pay attention to things that stand out in their formatting and note those down. And my last tip before I actually get into some of the books I'm reading is to either mark up the book while you're reading or to take notes while you're reading. So if you own the book, you can actually write in it with a pencil and make notes in the margins, which is really helpful. And if you don't, you can use flags or possibly highlight depending on your school's policies, and I'll show you that in a bit. If you really don't want to mark up your book, then you can take like really short bulleted notes on a piece of paper. You can also put questions in there, or you can take flow style notes, and I'll actually throw some of my recent notes up on the screen here. So these are notes that I took in researching textbook reading strategies for these videos, and this one and the last one. And as you can see, I took notes on the things I was reading, actually for multiple books, but it ended up creating a better picture that I can come back to. And it's in my own words, it's in my own terms, so it makes for better recall. So those are my 5 tips, and to round this video out, I'm going to show you a few of the books that I've been reading and 3 different active reading strategies that I adopted for each book. And the first book is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. Now this book is about cognitive biases, it's about bugs in human reasoning and rationality and decision making, and it's a super dense book. I actually have only gotten to page 145, as my little nine tails will tell you. If you look at the spine, or not the spine here, but the side of it, I've used flags to mark up almost every page that I have read. So this is one of those books that's just packed with information on almost every single page. Every single chapter mentions multiple studies with lots of results, defines different terms, and I was really interested in almost everything I was reading here. So as I went through, I used flags to mark up the book in a non-damaging way. And I was reading this book about a year ago. I've become a little bit more okay with marking up my books permanently since then, but the flag method does work, especially if you're renting textbooks or you plan on selling it later. You can just pull them out when you need to. When you have good notes for them and you finish reviewing. But yeah, it's a pretty good method. So the second book here is Confessions of a Scholarship Winner by Christina Ellis, and I'm going through this book because it's a fantastic overview of how to win scholarships. I'm probably going to put it on my essential books list and create a lot of blog posts and things on it. But with this book, I actually went through with a pencil and I would bracket paragraphs that held specific ideas I wanted to review later. I would write notes in the margin, underline specific terms that are actually really important. And as I'm looking back through the book, I can see all the spots that I wanted to note for later. So I'm actually going to go through the book a second time once I finish reading it and take good notes on it. And speaking of notes, the book I've been reading most recently is The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg. And if you were to be able to look through this book, you'll see no markings whatsoever. So I actually have a third active reading system, which is working really, really well for me at this point. And it's just to take notes on the chapter after I've read it. So I've created a habit of reading this Power of Habit. I've created a habit of reading this book every single day for at least 15 minutes, and I check it off in Habit RPG, and it's something that's becoming a very strong habit for me, so I definitely do it every day. And about once every 2 days, I finish a chapter, and immediately when I finish reading a chapter, I'll go over to Evernote on my desktop computer, go back through the chapter, and write notes in Evernote, which you can see right now on the chapter. So I've actually got a good bulleted summary of almost the entire book right now. Everything that I thought was important in the book is in that summary, and it's going to be about 3,000 words once I finish it, I'm estimating. So that's a lot less than what's in the book, and if I want to go back and review what I learned, it's going to be much easier, and it's in my own words as well. So those are just some of the strategies you can use for active reading. Hopefully you can implement some of these into your studies in order to cut down on that study time and increase your recall and your ability to do better on tests and essays and whatever it is you need to apply your readings to. If you want to get more videos on being an awesome student, then just hit that subscribe button below. Otherwise, I will see you in next week's video. Hey, thanks for watching my video. If you enjoyed it, then you can support me by giving it a like on YouTube or sharing it with a friend. If you want to get more videos just like this every single week on being a better college student, then click the subscribe button right there. If you missed the last video, a clip of it is playing right below there, and you can click that to watch it. Also, you can get a summary and links to anything I mentioned in the video by going to the companion blog post, which you can find by clicking on the orange logo right there. Lastly, if you want to get a free chapter of my book when it comes out, then you can click that book and subscribe to the College Info Feed newsletter. You'll also get notified when new podcast episodes and blog posts come out every week. Lastly, if you have ideas for new videos or you just want to connect with me, you can do so on Twitter or leave a comment on this video. Thanks.
A great video. I really liked it. It was great in the information. Also, I want to point out, and you might want to go back and look at it again, I want to point out how he had those 3 different strategies that he used, especially the one with Evernote. I don't know if you're familiar with Evernote, but I use that particular app. It's a great app that you can put notes into. It also, you can use it, you can connect it with your phone, you can connect it with your laptop, and in turn you will be able to retrieve these notes throughout all your devices. I love this different quote. When reviewing your notes before an exam, the most important will be illegible. Wow, how many times does that happen? You write down your notes and you don't go back and look at them. So reviewing, that was my preface to reviewing. And notice how he's climbing through a mounds of paper. But through assigned readings, again, this is the thing about reviewing. Use senses to review. Recite out loud. You can tick off items on your fingertips. Post visuals in your living space of key points. And then you remember those visual aids during tests. I know some of my students, we would talk about this. This happens in music for a lot of us when we're trying to memorize a piece and we're trying to think about it. We can almost visualize the music in our mind when we're playing it from and not looking at the music. So using these aids, the same thing for your test. You could put posts up on your mirror that you look at every day and before you get ready to go to a test. And then when you get in the test, all of a sudden you can visualize that visual. So reading with concentration, this is a big one. Tips for eliminating these distractions that you have is you want to have a quiet study place. I like to have background music, but sometimes you want to make sure you want to get away from that normal thing and get into a really quiet place. Shut down those electronic devices. A lot of times I always turn my phone upside down when I'm doing certain things just to make sure I don't even look at it or think about it. A lot of times you just shut it down, just turn it off. Read in blocks of time with short breaks. This is something that How to Be a Straight A Student. This is a book that I have read and I looked through, and How to Be a Straight A Student. And they talk about this, about studying so you can and having in blocks of time with short breaks. Sometimes we cram, and you continuously try to do it to try to cram the information in. But you need those short breaks, and you got to set goals for your study period. It's the reason I mentioned to many people when you were doing your schedule, you're in chapter 2 when we talked about developing time and putting together the weekly schedule assignment, and people would just, when they got to the calendar, they would halfway put in things. But you got to set goals for your study period. You have to study, and it's the reason many of them, I mentioned this to you. Just like you have certain classes you go to, when you're online, you really have to set goals because you have to say, because you can really, it's easy to say, oh, I've got it online, I don't have to study, I'll just do it Sunday night, or Sunday during the day. But you got to set goals and have specific times that you study for each class. And if you're online, just think about when that class might have met, and then or set up a time that you study for that class and the time that you do it every week. Also, in setting your goals for your study period and going back, you want to make sure before you sit down and study that you know what you're going to go over. Again, they talk about engage in physical activity during your break. Get up and walk. Uh, Go and set up. Some students would make sure that they would set up in a certain area where they could get up and go outside the library. They would study with friends, and so then you would have to move all your materials, and then you can take those different breaks. Actively engage with the material. As I mentioned earlier in this presentation, just like if you went to a movie that you really loved and somebody asked you about it, you could explain to them everything. That's the way you have to engage with the material that you're reading. Focus on the important portions of the text. And he talked about this in the video about, concentrating on the important points of the test, not the flub that in some cases textbooks have. Understand the words. How many times have you're reading the text, especially a textbook, and you don't understand what the word is, and you keep going? Okay, that's something that's very important to make sure you understand the words. Use organizers as you read, and as we saw in the video, there's several. He put together several. He shared with you several different methods that he organizes information. So as we proceed within our textbook, they talk about in this chapter, textbooks are not created equal. They're all structured entirely different. Math and science texts usually have figures and graphs, and textbooks can't include everything. And this is the reason that some instructors include supplementary readings. Some textbooks are better than others, and this happens all the time. Excuse me. Math texts. They usually have formulas and proofs of theorems, sample problems. In your math class, and I know you found this out now, you have to complete the homework on time. If not, you're penalized. And you have to do it regularly. If you don't practice regularly in your math classes, you'll get behind, and then in turn, the information is cumulative. So science textbooks. You got to review the contents, glossaries, appendices. You got to note how the chapters are put together. And in these science textbooks, they give you various visual elements. I think someone was talking about an anatomy class, and I think they're talking about learning and how they drew certain illustrations. So you got to pay attention in your science book to visual elements that they have. You have to scan these chapters, headings, summary, and the exercises that are presented. So when we look at social science and humanities texts, they usually have specific terms and special to each field. Humanity texts usually have facts, figures, examples, stories. So here's a question. In a small group, discuss how important you think textbooks are in your courses. What are other ways that you can access the information? This is an interesting question, and for some of you who might use this within your discussion, it's interesting how some students don't think that they're important and they can just Google everything. So supplementary material. And they talk about this in our book, Reading the Primary and Secondary Source. The supplementary material that's derived from the textbooks, and in many cases it can span your understanding of different concepts. Or in many cases, instructors, I do this a lot in the news, I will see a certain article or information that's related to our textbook, and I'll post it that I might see in different magazines that I might read. Sometimes you get supplementary material to be able to break down things that aren't as easy for you to understand. But sometimes the secondary sources can be more difficult to understand. So again, they say when it's difficult to understand, you read the summary first, and that a lot of times that can provide, gives you context. Again, some supplementary material in your class could be articles and scholarly journals. And they're usually introduced by an abstract, which is basically a paragraph-length summary. But supplementary material is always great to view and work on. So moving on through our chapter, improving and monitoring your reading. Improvement ahead. I like that stop sign. To improve your reading. From assignment to assignment, you want to make sure that you adjust your reading style. If you're using one style, and as you learn about other styles, try them. You got to adjust the time you set aside for your reading. Think about how much you want to read, or make sure that you give yourself enough time. You got to make sure that you connect the important ideas. And if the lecture and the textbook are identical, you got to focus your energies on one instead of the other. Or sometimes you can combine. Especially in the face-to-face class, if you read the material ahead of time and you get into the class, you can really know when the instructor is lecturing where the material is coming from. Many students just go into the lecture and they didn't read the material ahead of time. Okay, so then in turn, they have to really listen closely or they'll miss everything. To monitor your reading, got to make sure you identify the things that you don't understand. If you don't understand them, you want to try to get clarification. Research the meanings of concepts and or terms. The most important thing is to understand what the concept is. This is a good one too. Try reciting the material out loud. When you're reading, if you don't understand something, read it out loud. And ask which concepts might appear on the test. Ask your instructor. The thing is, you want to become knowledgeable about the material, so when you go in, now don't ask if you haven't covered it, but ask which concepts might appear on the test. So here's another little different kind of discussion. How do you monitor your own reading comprehension? On the basis of the material that we've covered, what are some strategies you could use to ensure you understand what you're reading? When you look at this material we covered from the videos, what strategies might you adopt to the way that you are dealing with your reading comprehension? So in the next part of our book, and I like this little apple, developing your vocabulary, comprehension, achievement, fluency, vocabulary, reading. Increase your vocabulary. Notice and write down unfamiliar terms. Think about what context they're in. A lot of times that's the way we generally try to figure out a word, by the context. Consider a word's parts. We divided, you heard ever since you've been developing your vocabulary to take different parts. And my wife teaches first grade and she talks about this a lot. Use a glossary or a dictionary to find out the terms. And use these new words when you write and also when you're talking to somebody. That's the best way to develop your vocabulary. Use those words. So next in that chapter, they talk about what do you do if you fall behind. And here's a marathon runners, and if you fall behind. To get back on track, you want to add to your study time. Maybe you're not spending enough time on the material. Very important. Join a study group. Since this class is online, it might be a little bit more difficult, but you guys can communicate. Remember, I think I talk about this all the time when somebody sends me an email from D2L to my Lone Star email. No, you have to be in our class. When you go to D2L, before you send the email, especially to me, you want to make sure you open up our class, and then you actually can connect with everybody else in the group. I think with these discussions that we're doing, many of you have developed a connection with somebody. So you never know who you can send an email to, and you can develop your study group. A lot of students wait until, and we'll talk about this throughout this course, a lot of students wait till right before the test, and all of a sudden they want to develop a study group. But it's important to develop a study group from the very beginning because you will get a chance to develop skills with somebody else. But if you're falling behind, this is really important. Ask for help. You got to say something. Talk to your instructors. But you also can ask for help because if you think about my opening presentation that talks about us being a family and you working together and us developing a family, you want to ask your classmates. That's the reason I have that discussion forum with questions and in some cases with specific things about questions. So you want to ask because in many cases your classmates will know the answer and will love to be able to share with you and can maybe share it in a way that you would really be able to understand, in some cases better than your instructor. But next we fall behind, you got to talk to your instructor, and we can find most of your instructors will find a way to try to help you uh, get abreast. But also, when you talk to the instructor, that lets them know that you care, and most importantly, don't give up. Now, if English is not your first language, and this happens with many students that come in Spanish, I actually, whenever I get to this chapter, I think about a young lady that was in one of my face-to-face EDUC classes, and she was Asian. And it seems as though after every class, she will come up to me to make sure she understood, and I could tell that in some cases I talk kind of fast, but she came up to me after every class and to get clarification. And when she did her career exploration project, which is a project that you guys are going to be doing at the end of the semester, it was beautiful. And she did it. Her career was running a restaurant, and it was flawless as related to her presentation and the amount of time that she put into it. But again, I tell you this, don't be discouraged. Read the material slowly, read the material more than once so you make sure that you understand it. And make sure you keep two good dictionaries, an English dictionary and a book translating the language that you're in to English. Also, they have so many different apps that you can speak in. I can remember one of my a gentleman who was from Venezuela who moved here, who uh, his English is not the best, and he actually has a translator on his phone, and he would say certain things in there and would give him translations in his phone. I forget the name of the app. Also, investigate the school's ESL English as a Second Language services. We have a very good program here, and you should connect with them for sure to help you. So, as we have toward the end of every chapter, tech tips. Embrace the ebook. I love ebooks. And they're alternatives to traditional printed books. I have so much paper. I got so many books. If I get a book, when I get a book, my preference is the ebook, and I can have it all on my tablet. That's the thing that I love. I have countless ebooks on my tablet. So, for example, if I, go on a flight or something, I want to take some reading material, I take my tablet, and on there, I have probably about 10 or 12 or 15 different books that I can look at, and which is only on my tablet, my iPad. Advantages. And in these ebooks, you can type notes in them, you can print pages, you can easily search the contents. Now, disadvantages, of course, the cost of ebook readers, how fragile they are as devices. I know I have an iPad Air, and it's very light, and I'm very careful with it. I know I actually have a Kindle, but I haven't, since I've used my Air, I haven't used my Kindle in I don't know how long. The options include, iPad, which I have Kindle, Nook, Kobo Touch. Uh, I really, some people want to feel the paper. I really love ebooks. And so this is the end of our, chapter discussing, making the most, uh, reading with college textbooks. Very important information that you want to make sure that you embrace and make sure that you read our text to get all of these different various techniques that you can use, because this is something that is very important, and this is going to translate. Not only reading college textbooks, this is going to translate throughout your life. If you go to graduate school, as you deal with professional developments and development uh, programs that you're going to have to embrace throughout your life and your career. And so I hope you enjoyed it. The end.